Black Bart, the gentleman devil. Death wore silk stockings and sipped tea while counting 400 conquered ships. And when Bartholomew Roberts smiled, even the devil himself took notes on proper etiquette. In the mist-shrouded hills of Pembrokeshire, Wales, where Celtic legends whisper through ancient stones and the Irish Sea crashes against rugged cliffs, a child was born who would redefine the very meaning of civilized brutality. The year was 1682, and while most of Europe still struggled to emerge from the shadows of medieval barbarism, little John Roberts, for that was his christened name, drew his first breath in a land that had always understood the fine line between order and chaos. Wales in the late 17th century was a country caught between worlds. The old Celtic ways still echoed in the valleys, where bards sang of heroes who had defied Roman legions and Saxon kings. Yet the new commercial age was dawning, bringing with it opportunities for those bold enough to seize them and clever enough to survive the taking. The Roberts family of Little Newcastle was neither wealthy nor destitute. They occupied that precarious middle ground where respectability was possible, but never guaranteed, where a man's fortune could be made or lost on the turn of a single decision. Young John grew up in this atmosphere of calculated risk and careful ambition. His father, George, was a man who understood that survival required adaptability, that the old ways of thinking were giving way to new possibilities for those willing to embrace change. The boy absorbed these lessons without conscious thought, the way children absorb language, through constant exposure to the rhythms and patterns that would shape his understanding of the world. But it was the sea that truly called to him. From the cliffs near his home, he could watch ships passing in the distance, their sails catching the wind like dreams made manifest. Each vessel carried stories of distant ports and exotic cargoes, of fortunes won and lost in the great game of maritime commerce that was transforming the world. For a boy with imagination and ambition, those ships represented freedom from the constraints of land-bound existence, a chance to write his own story on the vast canvas of ocean and sky. The decision to go to sea at 13 was both practical and inevitable. Wales offered limited opportunities for advancement, especially for young men without substantial family connections or inherited wealth. The maritime trade, however, was expanding rapidly, driven by England's growing colonial empire and the insatiable European demand for sugar, tobacco, and other New World luxuries. A clever boy, who learned quickly, could advance through the ranks, perhaps eventually commanding his own vessel and sharing in the profits of legitimate commerce. Those early years at sea were a harsh education in the realities of maritime life. The merchant vessels of the period were floating prisons where discipline was maintained. Through violence and survival depended on the ability to endure conditions that would have broken most land dwellers. Young Roberts learned to sleep in a hammock while the ship pitched and rolled beneath him, to work the rigging in storms that threatened to wash him overboard, to navigate by stars and instinct when instruments failed or proved inadequate. More importantly, he learned the intricate social dynamics that governed life aboard ship. The maritime world had its own hierarchies and codes of conduct, its own systems of justice and reward. A man's worth was measured not by his birth or wealth, but by his competence and reliability under pressure. Leadership was earned through demonstration rather than inherited through bloodline, and respect came to those who could deliver results when lives and fortunes hung in the balance. Roberts proved himself exceptionally capable at this dangerous game. His Welsh education had given him literacy and numeracy that set him apart from most sailors, while his natural intelligence allowed him to grasp quickly the complexities of navigation, cargo handling, and crew management. By his early 20s, he had advanced to positions of responsibility aboard several vessels, earning the trust of captains who valued competence over connections. But legitimate commerce, profitable as it might be, could never satisfy the deeper hunger that was growing within him. Roberts had tasted the wine of authority and found it intoxicating. He had seen how quickly fortunes could be made by those willing to take calculated risks. And he had observed that the line between legitimate trade and outright piracy was often thinner than most people cared to acknowledge. The privateers who had enriched themselves during the War of the Spanish Succession had proven that violence, properly applied, could be more profitable than any honest trade. The transformation from respectable sailor to piratical commander didn't happen overnight. It began with small compromises, minor infractions, that gradually eroded the moral barriers between lawful and unlawful behavior. A cargo manifest that didn't quite match the actual goods aboard ship. A port call that wasn't reported to the proper authorities. A transaction that violated someone's monopoly but enriched everyone directly involved. These early steps taught Roberts valuable lessons about the nature of law and authority in the maritime world. Rules, he discovered, were negotiable for those with sufficient power to enforce their own interpretations. Justice was a luxury that only the strong could afford. And morality was often a matter of perspective rather than absolute principle. The Spanish treasure ships that had enriched English privateers during wartime carried the same gold in peacetime. The only difference was the paperwork that declared one theft legal and another criminal. His opportunity came in 1719, when he signed aboard the Princess as third mate under Captain Howell Davis. Davis was himself a Welsh pirate who had recently turned to the sweet trade after the end of legitimate privateering opportunities. The Princess operated in West African waters, preying on the slave ships and merchant vessels that plied the Guinea coast. It was brutal, dangerous work that required men with strong stomachs and stronger nerves. Roberts found himself perfectly suited to this new calling. The skills he had developed during years of legitimate maritime service translated seamlessly to piratical enterprise. Navigation was navigation, whether the destination was a legal port or a secret anchorage. Crew management was crew management, whether the men were motivated by wages or shares of prize money. The only real difference was the willingness to use violence without legal sanction, and Roberts discovered that he had no shortage of such willingness when the stakes were high enough. Under Davis's tutelage, he learned the practical aspects of piracy that no amount of legitimate seamanship could have taught him. How to identify vulnerable targets and avoid dangerous opponents. How to approach a potential prize in a manner that maximized intimidation while minimizing risk. How to divide spoils in a way that maintained crew loyalty, while ensuring adequate reserves for future operations. Most importantly, how to project an image of terrifying competence that would induce surrender without the need for actual combat. The lessons came to an abrupt end when Davis was killed during a treacherous parley with Portuguese authorities at Principe Island. The captain had grown overconfident, perhaps believing that his reputation alone would protect him from betrayal. His death served as a brutal reminder that in the pirate world, survival depended on constant vigilance and the assumption that everyone was a potential enemy. With Davis dead, the crew faced a choice that would determine their future. Elect a new captain from among their ranks, or dissolve the partnership and seek other opportunities. Roberts, despite being relatively new to the piratical life, possessed qualities that made him an obvious candidate for leadership. He was educated, experienced in navigation and seamanship, and had demonstrated the kind of cold-blooded pragmatism that successful pirate captains required. His election as captain marked the true beginning of the legend that would become Black Bart. Roberts understood that piracy, properly executed, was a business that required the same careful planning and strategic thinking as any legitimate enterprise. The difference lay not in the methods but in the willingness to operate outside the constraints of conventional law and morality. His first act as captain was to establish a code of conduct that would govern his crew's behavior. This wasn't mere formality. The pirate code that Roberts drafted became a model for similar documents throughout the Caribbean and Atlantic. It addressed everything from the division of prize money to the treatment of prisoners, from the settlement of disputes to the punishment of cowardice or mutiny. The code revealed Roberts's fundamental understanding of human nature and group dynamics. Men would follow a leader who promised them wealth and adventure, but they would remain loyal only to one who delivered on those promises, while maintaining order and discipline. The code provided a framework within which individual ambition could be channeled toward collective success, ensuring that the natural tensions within a pirate crew wouldn't destroy the enterprise from within. More remarkably, The code included provisions for medical care and disability compensation that were far more generous than anything available to sailors in legitimate service. A man who lost a limb in battle would receive a substantial payment from the common fund. Those injured in the line of duty would be cared for until they recovered or died. These weren't empty promises. Roberts understood that loyalty was purchased through demonstrated concern for his followers' welfare. The psychological impact of such provisions was enormous. Men who might have hesitated to join a pirate crew because of the risks involved could see that Roberts offered not just the chance for wealth, but genuine security for themselves and their families. Word of such treatment spread throughout the maritime community, making it easier for Roberts to recruit skilled sailors who might otherwise have remained in legitimate service. But the code was more than just a recruitment tool. It was a reflection of Roberts' own character and values. Despite his chosen profession, he remained in many ways a gentleman of the old school, a man who believed that even violence should be conducted according to certain standards of behavior. His crews were forbidden to rape captive women, a rule that was rigorously enforced. Prisoners were to be treated humanely unless they resisted capture or proved hostile. Civilian vessels that surrendered immediately were to be released with minimal harm to cargo or crew. These standards set Roberts apart from many of his contemporaries, who viewed piracy as license for unlimited brutality and excess. Where others saw only opportunities for immediate gratification, Roberts recognized the long-term advantages of maintaining a reputation for honorable conduct. A merchant captain who knew that surrender would be followed by decent treatment was far more likely to give up without a fight than one who expected torture and death regardless of his actions. The transformation from John Roberts to Bartholomew Robert Sand, eventually to Black Bart, was as much theatrical as practical. Roberts understood that reputation was a weapon more powerful than any cannon, that the right image could accomplish more than the most devastating broadside. He cultivated an appearance that was both elegant and intimidating, favoring fine clothing and genteel manners that contrasted sharply with the popular image of pirates as crude, unwashed brigands. His personal habits reinforced this carefully constructed persona. While his men drank rum and sang Bodie songs, Roberts sipped tea and read books. He preferred silk stockings to rope-soled shoes, elegant coats to rough sailor's garb. When he spoke, it was with the measured cadence of an educated gentleman, rather than the crude dialect of the forecastle. The effect was disconcerting and unforgettable. Here was a pirate who looked and acted like a merchant prince, a man who could discuss philosophy while ordering the destruction of a captured vessel. The nickname Black Bart emerged gradually, a reference both to his dark Welsh complexion and to the black silk flag he flew as his personal standard. Unlike the skull and crossbones favored by many pirates, Roberts' flag featured his own image standing on two skulls labeled ABH and AMH, a Barbadian S-head and a Martinican S-head. The symbolism was clear. He bore particular grudges against those Caribbean islands whose governors had attempted to suppress his activities. This personal approach to symbolism was characteristic of Roberts' attention to detail in all aspects of his operations. Where other pirates operated haphazardly, taking whatever targets presented themselves, Roberts planned his campaigns with the precision of a military strategist. He studied shipping schedules, analyzed trade routes, and positioned his vessels to maximize their chances of encountering valuable prizes while minimizing the risk of confrontation with naval forces. His flagship, the Royal Fortuna, name he used for several successive vessels, became a symbol of his power and success. Unlike the cramped, dirty ships that most pirates called home, the Royal Fortune was maintained to the standards of a gentleman's yacht. The deck was scrubbed daily, the brass polished to mirror brightness, the rigging kept in perfect order. Visitors were invariably impressed by the ship's condition and the discipline of her crew, creating an image of professional competence that enhanced Roberts' reputation throughout the maritime world. The psychological warfare extended to his treatment of prisoners and the stories that spread from his encounters. Roberts made it a point to be personally present when captured vessels were searched and their crews interrogated. He would appear on deck in his finest clothing, offer polite greetings to his prisoners, and conduct the proceedings with the courtesy of a gentleman host entertaining unexpected guests. This civilized approach had several advantages. Terrified prisoners, expecting brutal treatment, were often so relieved by Roberts' courtesy that they volunteered information about other potential targets or valuable cargoes. Captains who had been treated well spread word of his honorable conduct, making other potential victims more likely to surrender without resistance. The contrast between his elegant manner and his deadly profession created an aura of sophisticated menace that was far more intimidating than crude threats or displays of violence. But beneath a silken courtesy lay a core of steel that revealed itself when circumstances required. Roberts could be absolutely ruthless when faced with resistance or betrayal. Crews that fought back were shown no mercy. Captains who attempted to conceal valuable cargo faced severe punishment. Anyone who violated his code of conduct could expect swift and brutal justice. The execution of such discipline was always carried out with the same careful attention to theater that characterized all of Roberts' actions. Punishment was public, formal, and conducted according to predetermined rules that everyone understood. The message was clear. Roberts' courtesy was a privilege that could be withdrawn at any moment, and those who abused his generosity would face consequences that were both certain and severe. This combination of gentleman's manners and pirate steel proved devastatingly effective. During his 30-month career as a pirate captain, Roberts captured over 400 vessels, more than any other pirate in history. His hunting grounds stretched from the Caribbean to the West African coast, covering thousands of square miles of ocean, where his name became synonymous with maritime terror. The sheer scale of his operations was unprecedented. Where other pirates might capture a few ships and then retire to enjoy their gains, Roberts maintained a constant state of aggressive expansion. His fleet grew to include multiple vessels operating in coordination, each commanded by trusted lieutenants who understood his methods and shared his vision of disciplined piracy. The financial rewards were enormous. Contemporary accounts suggest that Roberts' personal share of the accumulated prizes amounted to wealth that would have made him one of the richest men in Britain. His crew members, too, prospered beyond their wildest dreams, earning more in a few months of piracy than they could have accumulated in a lifetime of legitimate employment. But wealth was never Roberts' primary motivation. What drove him was the intoxicating taste of absolute power, the godlike authority that came with commanding men and ships in waters where his word was the only law that mattered. He had created his own kingdom on the seas, a floating empire where his will was paramount and his justice final. The psychological satisfaction of such power was evident in his behavior and demeanor. Contemporary accounts describe him as supremely confident, a man who carried himself with the bearing of natural nobility. He spoke with the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question, and his presence dominated any room or deck he entered. Even his enemies acknowledged his charismatic qualities, noting that he possessed the rare combination of intelligence, courage, and leadership ability that marked truly exceptional individuals. Yet for all his success, Roberts remained aware that his position was fundamentally precarious. Piracy was a young man's game, dependent on physical vigor, quick reflexes, and the ability to endure hardships that would destroy softer individuals. Age, injury, or simple bad luck could end his career at any moment, leaving him with nothing but memories and perhaps a price on his head that would make retirement impossible. This awareness shaped his famous motto, "A merry life and a short one." The phrase captured perfectly the philosophy that guided his actions, the understanding that the rewards of piracy came at the cost of shortened life expectancy, and that therefore every moment should be lived to its fullest potential. There was no point in accumulating wealth for a future that might never arrive. Better to enjoy the present while it lasted and face whatever consequences might follow. The motto also reflected Roberts's realistic assessment of the forces arrayed against him. The British Royal Navy was gradually adapting to the pirate threat, developing new tactics and deploying more resources to suppress piratical activity. The easy targets that had made piracy profitable were becoming scarcer as merchant, Vessels improved their defenses, and naval patrols became more frequent. The golden age of piracy was drawing to a close, and Roberts was shrewd enough to recognize the signs. His response to these changing conditions was to intensify his operations rather than retreat. If the window of opportunity was closing, he would extract maximum advantage from the time that remained. His campaigns became more ambitious, his targets more valuable, his methods more sophisticated. He was racing against time, trying to accomplish as much as possible before the inevitable reckoning arrived. The end came, as it had to, through the intersection of ambition and circumstance that defines all great tragedies. In February 1722, Roberts was operating off the West African coast when HMS Swallow, commanded by Captain Chaloner Ogle, appeared on the horizon. The Royal Navy vessel had been hunting Roberts for months. Following intelligence reports and systematic searches that gradually narrowed his possible locations, Roberts faced a choice that would determine not only his own fate, but the future of piracy itself. He could attempt to flee, using his superior knowledge of local waters and weather conditions to escape pursuit, or he could stand and fight, relying on his crew's experience and his own tactical brilliance to overcome the naval vessel's superior firepower. The decision was characteristic of the man he had become. Roberts chose to fight, not because he believed he could win, but because retreat would have been a betrayal of everything he represented. He had built his reputation on the principle that he would face any challenge, overcome any obstacle, defeat any enemy through superior courage and skill. To run from a single naval vessel, regardless of the tactical situation, would have undermined the very foundation of his authority. The battle was brief but decisive. Swallow's disciplined gunnery and superior position quickly told against the pirate vessel. Despite the desperate courage of Roberts's crew, the captain himself was struck by grapeshot early in the engagement, the metal balls tearing through his throat and ending his life almost instantly. With their leader dead, the remaining pirates quickly surrendered, understanding that continued resistance would only result in unnecessary casualties. Roberts' body was thrown overboard according to his own standing orders. He had always declared that he would rather feed the fishes than provide a trophy for his enemies. The death of Black Bart marked the end of an era. Roberts was measured by vessels captured as the most successful pirate of the golden age of piracy, taking over 400 prize ships during his career, and his death is considered the culmination of the entire era. As no other notorious pirates emerged after him, the systematic suppression of piracy that followed his demise effectively ended. The romantic age of Caribbean buccaneering that had flourished for over a century. But the legend that Roberts created during his brief but spectacular career proved more durable than any earthly authority. Within months of his death, his story was being told in taverns from London to Port Royal, growing more elaborate and impressive with each retelling. The gentleman pirate who had sipped tea while commanding 400 captured vessels became a figure of myth and legend, inspiring countless imitators and admirers. The code of conduct that Roberts had established became a model for similar documents throughout the maritime world, influencing not only other pirates but legitimate naval organizations as well. His provisions for medical care and disability compensation were decades ahead of their time, anticipating reforms that wouldn't be widely adopted until the 19th century. Perhaps most significantly, Roberts had demonstrated that piracy could be conducted as a professional enterprise rather than mere criminal opportunism. His systematic approach to planning and operations, his attention to crew welfare and discipline, his sophisticated understanding of maritime commerce and naval tactics all established new standards for what piratical leadership could accomplish. The theatrical aspects of his persona also had lasting influence. The image of the gentleman pirate, elegant in dress and manner but deadly in action, became a staple of popular culture that persists to this day. From Byron's romantic corsairs to modern cinematic swashbucklers, the archetype that Roberts created continues to shape our understanding of what piracy represents in human imagination. Even his enemies acknowledged his exceptional qualities. Captain Ogle, who killed him, wrote respectfully of Roberts's courage and leadership abilities. Colonial governors, who had suffered from his depredations, admitted privately that he had conducted his campaigns with remarkable skill and sophistication. Naval officers who studied his tactics incorporated his innovations into their own strategic thinking. The psychological impact of Roberts's career extended far beyond the maritime world. His success challenged fundamental assumptions about law, authority, and social order that underpinned European civilization. Here was a man who had rejected the constraints of legitimate society and created his own kingdom based on merit rather than birth, competence rather than connections, performance rather than pedigree. The implications were profoundly disturbing to established authorities. If a Welsh sailor could transform himself into a maritime emperor through courage and intelligence, what did that say about the divine right of kings or the natural order of society? If piracy could be more rewarding than legitimate commerce, more honorable than sanctioned violence, more democratic than established government, then perhaps the entire structure of civilization needed re-examination. Roberts's code of conduct, in particular, offered a glimpse of alternative social arrangements that challenged conventional wisdom about human nature and group organization. The provisions for medical care, democratic decision-making, and merit-based advancement suggested that cooperation and mutual support could emerge even in the most lawless environments. The loyalty that Roberts inspired in his followers demonstrated that leadership based on competence and concern for subordinates' welfare could be more effective than authority based on tradition or force alone. These subversive implications help explain why the authorities were so determined to suppress piracy and why Roberts became such an important target. He represented more than just a criminal threat. He embodied a challenge to the fundamental assumptions upon which European society was based. His very existence proved that alternative forms of social organization were possible, that individuals could reject established hierarchies and create their own systems of law and justice. The speed with which piracy declined after Roberts's death also reflects the importance of individual leadership in sustaining revolutionary movements. Without his organizing genius and charismatic authority, the various pirate crews quickly fragmented into smaller, less effective units that were easily suppressed by conventional naval forces. The era of great pirate fleets operating as coherent military organizations died with their most successful commander. Yet the ideas that Roberts represented proved more durable than the man himself. The principles of democratic governance, merit-based advancement, and social insurance that characterized his pirate code influenced political and social developments throughout the 18th and 19th centuries. Revolutionary movements in Europe and America drew inspiration from the example of men who had successfully challenged established authority and created alternative forms of social organization. The romantic image of the gentleman pirate also served important cultural functions, providing a socially acceptable outlet for fantasies of rebellion and freedom that couldn't be expressed through conventional channels. Roberts became a safe symbol of resistance to authority, a figure who could be admired without threatening the stability of legitimate society. In literature and popular culture, the archetype he created offered audiences a vicarious experience of absolute freedom and unlimited possibility. The gentleman pirate represented everything that conventional society forbade: the rejection of social constraints, the pursuit of individual desires without regard for others' opinions, the willingness to take by force what could not be obtained through legitimate means. This symbolic function helps explain why pirate stories have remained popular long after the historical reality of piracy ceased to be a significant threat. The image of the elegant, deadly, charismatic pirate captain speaks to deep psychological needs that persist regardless of changing social conditions. Roberts' legacy lies not in his criminal activities, but in his demonstration that individual will and intelligence could triumph over seemingly insurmountable obstacles. The archaeological and historical research that continues to investigate Roberts' career reveals new dimensions of his achievement with each passing year. Contemporary documents that have survived show the remarkable scope of his operations and the sophisticated intelligence networks that supported his activities. Ship manifests, insurance records, and government correspondence provide evidence of the systematic approach that made him so successful. Perhaps most remarkably, these historical sources reveal that Roberts' reputation for honorable conduct was not merely propaganda, but reflected genuine principles that he maintained throughout his career. Captives' testimonies consistently praise his courteous treatment and adherence to his stated code of conduct. Even hostile witnesses acknowledged that he kept his word when agreements were reached and showed mercy to those who surrendered without resistance. This evidence of authentic honor within a criminal context raises fascinating questions about the nature of morality and the relationship between individual ethics and social law. Roberts demonstrated that it was possible to maintain high personal standards while rejecting societal norms, to be both a gentleman and a pirate, to show mercy while exercising ultimate authority over life and death. The paradox of his character: elegant brutality, courteous ruthlessness, principled criminality, continues to fascinate scholars and popular audiences alike. He represents the complexity of human nature in its most extreme form, showing that individuals are capable of embodying contradictory qualities that conventional moral categories cannot adequately describe. Modern leadership studies have found much to admire in Roberts' methods, particularly his attention to organizational culture and employee welfare. His pirate code addressed many of the same issues that contemporary management theorists identify as crucial for maintaining high-performance teams: clear expectations, fair compensation, democratic participation in decision-making, and comprehensive benefits packages. The loyalty that Roberts inspired in his followers provides a case study in effective leadership that transcends the criminal context of his activities. His ability to motivate men to risk their lives for shared goals, to maintain discipline without destroying initiative, to balance individual needs with collective requirements, these are qualities that any leader might envy. Even his personal style offers lessons for modern executives: the careful attention to appearance and manner, the cultivation of a distinctive personal brand, the use of symbolic gestures to reinforce key messages, all demonstrates sophisticated understanding of how leaders can use image and perception to enhance their effectiveness. The tragic arc of Roberts' career also illustrates timeless themes about the relationship between individual ambition and historical forces. His rise coincided with a unique set of circumstances that made large-scale piracy possible: the end of major European wars, the expansion of maritime commerce, the weakness of colonial governments, the limited reach of naval power. His fall reflected the gradual adaptation of legitimate authorities to the pirate threat and the changing economic conditions that made piracy less profitable. In this sense, Roberts was both the creator and the victim of his own historical moment. His exceptional abilities allowed him to exploit opportunities that others missed, but those same opportunities were inherently temporary. The very success of his operations hastened the development of countermeasures that would eventually destroy him and his profession. The poignancy of his famous motto, "A merry life and a short one," lies in its recognition of this fundamental truth. Roberts understood that he was living in a golden age that could not last, that his success was creating the conditions for his own downfall. Yet he chose to embrace that fate rather than seek safer alternatives, preferring a brief period of absolute freedom to a longer life of comfortable compromise. This choice speaks to something fundamental in human nature: the desire to live authentically, to pursue one's deepest aspirations regardless of the consequences, to die as oneself rather than survive as someone else's version of who one should be. Roberts' tragedy was also his triumph. He achieved complete self-realization at the cost of early death, becoming fully himself even as he destroyed himself. The continuing fascination with his story reflects our own struggles with similar choices, albeit in less dramatic forms. Everyone faces decisions between security and adventure, conformity and authenticity, safe compromise and dangerous aspiration. Roberts represents the extreme case of someone who chose adventure over security, authenticity over conformity, aspiration over compromise, and paid the ultimate price for those choices. His legacy reminds us that heroism and villainy are often separated by perspective, rather than substance, that the same qualities that make someone a great leader can also make them a dangerous criminal, that honor and brutality can coexist in the same individual. Black Bart was simultaneously a gentleman and a monster, a democratic reformer and a violent predator, a romantic hero and a cold-blooded killer. Perhaps that is why his story endures, while those of more conventional figures fade from memory. He embodied the contradictions that define human existence, showing us what we might become if we had the courage to pursue our deepest desires without regard for social constraints. His life was an experiment in absolute freedom, and his death was the price that freedom ultimately demanded. The tea grows cold in elegant china cups, the silk stockings yellow with age, but the legend lives on. Reminder that once, for 30 brief months, a Welsh sailor became king of the seas and ruled an empire built on wind and will alone. The transformation from respectable merchant sailor to pirate king had been gradual but inexorable, like the tide that slowly covers a beach until nothing of the original landscape remains visible. Roberts understood better than most that identity was a malleable thing, that a man could reinvent himself as completely as circumstances demanded. The boy who had left Wales with dreams of honest prosperity had died somewhere in the Caribbean heat, replaced by a creature of silk and steel, who commanded absolute loyalty from men who would have laughed at the original John Roberts. This metamorphosis was perhaps the most remarkable aspect of his entire career. Physical courage was common enough among sailors. The maritime life attracted men who were comfortable with danger and violence. Intelligence was rarer but not unknown. The complexities of navigation and trade required sharp minds and quick thinking, but the combination of these qualities with the theatrical genius necessary to create and maintain a legendary persona was extraordinarily uncommon. Roberts possessed an almost supernatural ability to read human nature and exploit the psychological weaknesses he discovered. He understood that most men were governed by fear and greed in roughly equal measure, and he crafted his public image to maximize both emotions in his favor. The sight of his elegant figure on the quarterdeck, calmly sipping tea while his crew prepared for battle, was calculated to inspire terror in enemies and confidence in followers. The psychological warfare extended to every aspect of his operations. The royal fortune was maintained not just for practical reasons, but as a floating advertisement for Roberts' success and sophistication. Visitors invariably commented on the ship's immaculate condition, the discipline of her crew, and the obvious wealth displayed in her appointments. These impressions spread throughout the maritime community, creating a reputation that often accomplished more than cannon fire could achieve. His personal library aboard the Royal Fortune was particularly effective in this regard. Roberts collected books with the same systematic attention he devoted to accumulating prize money, understanding that knowledge was as valuable as gold in the right circumstances. When prisoners were brought aboard, they often expressed amazement at finding volumes of philosophy, literature, and technical manuals in a pirate's cabin. The image of a captain who read Plutarch and Newton while planning his next raid was both fascinating and terrifying to men accustomed to thinking of pirates as illiterate brutes. The books served practical purposes as well. Roberts used them to stay current with political developments that might affect his operations, to study the tactical innovations of contemporary naval commanders, and to educate himself in areas where his formal schooling had been lacking. He was particularly interested in works on law and government, understanding that his piratical activities were essentially a form of revolutionary warfare against the established order. This intellectual approach to piracy was evident in his strategic planning, which operated on multiple levels simultaneously. Roberts didn't simply rob ships, he disrupted entire trading networks, creating economic consequences that rippled across the Atlantic world. His systematic attacks on slave vessels off the West African coast, for instance, drove up insurance rates and forced traders to seek alternative routes that were often longer and more expensive. The financial impact of his operations was staggering in its scope and sophistication. Contemporary estimates suggest that Roberts's campaigns cost legitimate commerce millions of pounds in direct losses, increased insurance premiums, and economic disruption. His ability to appear suddenly in unexpected locations kept entire fleets of merchant vessels trapped in port for weeks at a time, generating additional losses that far exceeded the value of the ships and cargoes he actually captured. This economic warfare was deliberately calculated to maximize pressure on colonial and metropolitan authorities. Roberts understood that governments might tolerate a certain level of criminal activity, but systematic disruption of commerce would eventually force them to take decisive action against him. He was essentially betting that he could accumulate enough wealth and establish a sufficiently secure base of operations before the inevitable crackdown arrived. The bet was a reasonable one, given the limited resources available to colonial governments in the early 18th century. The Royal Navy, formidable as it was, could not be everywhere at once. Colonial militias were primarily trained for land warfare and were generally ineffective against experienced pirate crews operating from well-defended ships. The vast distances involved in patrolling the Atlantic sea lanes meant that Roberts could often operate for months without encountering any serious opposition. His intelligence network was crucial to maintaining this advantage. Roberts cultivated informants throughout the Caribbean and Atlantic world, using a combination of bribery, intimidation, and genuine friendship to gather information about naval patrols, merchant shipping schedules, and political developments that might affect his operations. This network rivaled anything maintained by legitimate governments and provided him with intelligence that was often superior to what was available to his opponents. The financing of this network revealed another aspect of Roberts's business acumen. Rather than simply spending prize money on immediate pleasures, he invested substantial sums in maintaining the infrastructure that made his continued success possible. Informants were paid regularly and generously. Safe havens were maintained through careful cultivation of local officials, and strategic supplies were stockpiled at locations throughout his operational area. This systematic approach extended to his recruitment practices as well. Roberts didn't rely on chance encounters to build his crew. He actively sought out sailors with specific skills that would enhance his capabilities. Experienced gunners, skilled navigators, capable carpenters, and reliable quartermasters were recruited through networks that reached into every major port in the Atlantic world. The result was a crew that functioned with the efficiency of a professional military unit rather than the chaotic improvisation typical of most pirate bands. The training and discipline he imposed on new recruits was legendary throughout the pirate community. Men who joined Roberts' crew, expecting the anarchic freedom typically associated with piracy, found themselves subject to regulations that were more stringent than those imposed by most legitimate naval services. The daily routine aboard the Royal Fortune included regular weapon drills, navigation instruction, and even lessons in reading and writing for those who lacked basic literacy. This emphasis on education was both practical and ideological. Roberts understood that ignorant men were unreliable men, prone to panic in crisis situations, and incapable of independent judgment when circumstances required initiative. By educating his followers, he created a more capable and dependable organization, while also spreading his own intellectual interests and political ideas throughout the pirate community. The political dimensions of Roberts' piracy have been largely overlooked by popular accounts that focus on his criminal activities and personal eccentricities. But his career took place during a period of significant political upheaval in the Atlantic world, and his operations both reflected and contributed to the broader tensions that were reshaping the relationship between European powers and their colonial possessions. The War of the Spanish Succession had ended less than a decade before Roberts began his piratical career, but its consequences continued to reverberate throughout the maritime world. Thousands of former privateers and naval personnel had been discharged without adequate compensation or alternative employment, creating a large population of men with military skills but few legitimate opportunities to use them. Roberts' recruitment success depended largely on tapping into this reservoir of experienced but dissatisfied maritime workers. The economic disruption caused by the war had also created opportunities for piracy by weakening the defensive capabilities of colonial governments, while simultaneously increasing the value of the trade routes that pirates targeted. The Spanish treasure fleets that had once been heavily guarded were now sailing with reduced escorts, while the expansion of English and French colonial trade created new targets that were often inadequately protected. Roberts's operations were also influenced by the complex diplomatic relationships between European powers, which created legal ambiguities that could be exploited by clever pirates. A ship flying French colors might be considered a legitimate prize by an English pirate, while the same vessel could claim protection under different circumstances. Roberts became expert at navigating these legal complexities, often using them to justify his actions or to avoid prosecution when captured goods were later disputed in admiralty courts. The social dimensions of piracy during Roberts's era were equally complex. The pirate community that flourished in the early 18th century was remarkably diverse, including men from virtually every European nation as well as Africans, both free and escaped slaves, and even some Native Americans. This cosmopolitan character was particularly pronounced in Roberts's crew, which at various times included Welsh sailors, English deserters, French prisoners, Dutch merchants, Portuguese fishermen, and African warriors. This diversity created both opportunities and challenges for Roberts as a leader. The varied backgrounds of his followers brought a wide range of skills and perspectives that enhanced the crew's overall capabilities. But it also created potential sources of conflict that required careful management. Language barriers, cultural differences, and conflicting loyalties all had to be addressed through the combination of firm discipline and inclusive policies that characterized Roberts's leadership style. His famous pirate code addressed many of these issues directly, establishing clear rules for behavior that transcended national and cultural boundaries. The code's provisions for democratic decision-making ensured that all crew members had a voice in important decisions, while its emphasis on merit-based advancement created opportunities for talented individuals regardless of their background. The result was a remarkably cohesive organization that functioned effectively despite its diverse composition. The code also reflected Roberts's understanding of the economic realities that drove men to piracy. The provisions for medical care and disability compensation addressed practical concerns that legitimate employers typically ignored, while the democratic distribution of prize money ensured that ordinary crew members shared in the profits generated by their collective efforts. These policies created loyalty that went beyond mere fear or greed, binding Roberts's followers to him through genuine appreciation for his concern for their welfare. The religious dimensions of Roberts's career provide another fascinating window into the complexities of 18th-century pirate culture. Despite his criminal profession, Roberts maintained his Christian faith throughout his piratical career, attending services when possible and ensuring that his crew respected basic Christian principles in their treatment of prisoners and civilian populations. This was not mere hypocrisy. Contemporary accounts suggest that Roberts genuinely believed that piracy, properly conducted, was compatible with Christian morality. This belief was based on his understanding of the corruption and injustice that characterized much of the legitimate maritime trade of his era. The slave trade, which provided enormous profits for respectable merchants, involved systematic brutality that far exceeded anything practiced by most pirates. The exploitation of colonial populations by European trading companies often resulted in suffering that made piratical depredations seem minor by comparison. From this perspective, Roberts could argue that his activities were merely a different form of the predatory behavior that characterized the entire Atlantic economy. His treatment of captured slave ships revealed the complexity of his moral position. Roberts generally released enslaved Africans rather than selling them, though contemporary accounts suggest that some joined his crew voluntarily, while others were simply abandoned at convenient locations. This policy cost him substantial potential profits, but was consistent with his stated opposition to the slave trade, which he considered more morally objectionable than piracy. The economic calculations behind this policy were also sophisticated. Roberts understood that the slave trade was one of the most heavily defended branches of Atlantic commerce, with powerful interests in Europe and America committed to its protection. By avoiding direct participation in slavery while disrupting the trade through piratical attacks, he could claim moral superiority over his merchant enemies, while avoiding some of the most dangerous opponents he might otherwise have faced. The technological aspects of Roberts' operations revealed his remarkable ability to adapt to changing conditions and exploit new opportunities. The early 18th century was a period of rapid innovation in naval architecture, navigation, and gunnery, and Roberts was quick to incorporate new developments into his fleet's capabilities. He was among the first pirates to use the improved chronometers that made accurate longitude calculations possible, giving him a significant advantage in navigation and positioning. His ships were also equipped with the most advanced cannon available, often taken from captured naval vessels or purchased through his extensive smuggling networks. The firepower of the Royal Fortune rivaled that of many legitimate warships, while her speed and maneuverability allowed Roberts to choose his battles carefully and retreat when facing superior opposition. This combination of advanced technology and tactical flexibility was crucial to his success in avoiding the naval patrols that eventually destroyed most of his contemporaries. The intelligence-gathering capabilities that Roberts developed were equally advanced for their time. His network of informants used a sophisticated communication system that included coded messages, secret meeting places, and carefully planned courier routes. Information about naval movements, merchant shipping schedules, and political developments was collected systematically and analyzed for its potential impact on piratical operations. This intelligence network also served as an early warning system that helped Roberts avoid many of the traps that caught less well-informed pirates. When HMS Swallow began her systematic hunt for Roberts in 1721, his informants provided regular updates on the naval vessel's location and intentions. The fact that Ogle eventually succeeded in cornering Roberts, despite these advantages, speaks to the Royal Navy captain as exceptional skill and persistence, rather than any failure in Roberts' intelligence operations. The final confrontation between Roberts and Ogle represented a clash between two of the most capable naval commanders of their era. Ogle was a veteran officer who had studied Roberts' methods carefully and developed specific tactics designed to counter the pirate's advantages. His systematic approach to the hunt, using multiple ships and coordinated patrols to limit Roberts' options, demonstrated the kind of professional competence that the Royal Navy was developing in response to the pirate threat. Roberts, for his part, understood that the encounter would likely be decisive regardless of its outcome. His intelligence network had informed him of Ogle's approach, and he had time to escape if he chose to do so. His decision to stand and fight reflected both his personal code of honor and his realistic assessment that the conditions which had made his career possible were rapidly disappearing. Even if he escaped this particular encounter, others would follow, and each successive hunt would be more difficult to evade. The battle itself was a masterpiece of naval tactics on both sides. Roberts attempted to use his superior knowledge of local waters and weather conditions to gain an advantage, while Ogle relied on disciplined gunnery and superior numbers to overcome the pirates' tactical advantages. The engagement was brief but intense, with both commanders demonstrating the skills that had made them legendary figures in their respective spheres. Roberts's death was as theatrical as his life had been. Contemporary accounts describe him falling with a grape-shot wound to the throat, while still trying to direct his crew's defense of the ship. His last words, according to witnesses, were instructions to his men to continue fighting even after his death. The image of the elegant pirate captain dying in his finest clothes, while urging his followers to maintain their resistance, became an instant legend that spread throughout the maritime world. The disposal of his body, according to his own standing orders thrown overboard, rather than preserved as a trophy for his enemies, was the final expression of the theatrical sense that had characterized his entire career. Even in death, Roberts managed to deny his opponents the symbolic victory they sought. while ensuring that his legend would be enhanced rather than diminished by his demise. The immediate aftermath of Roberts' death revealed the extent to which his personal leadership had held together the complex organization he had created. Without his unifying presence, the crew quickly fragmented into smaller groups that were easily captured or scattered by Ogle's forces. The intelligence network that had served Roberts so well collapsed within weeks, as informants switched sides or simply disappeared rather than risk association with a dead leader. The broader pirate community also felt the impact of Roberts' death almost immediately. His success had inspired imitators throughout the Atlantic world, but his demise demonstrated that even the most successful pirates were ultimately vulnerable to determined opposition from legitimate authorities. The psychological effect was devastating. If Black Bart could be killed, no pirate was safe from the expanding reach of naval power. The legal proceedings that followed Roberts' death provided fascinating insights into the methods and organization of his pirate enterprise. The captured crew members, facing the certainty of execution, provided detailed testimony about Roberts' operations in exchange for clemency. Their accounts revealed the sophisticated planning and extensive resources that had made his campaigns so successful, while also demonstrating the loyalty and respect that Roberts had inspired in his followers. The trial records also illuminated the complex moral universe that Roberts had created for his crew. Many of the captured pirates expressed genuine confusion about why their activities were considered criminal, given the systematic injustices and exploitation that characterized legitimate commerce in the Atlantic world. Their testimony suggested that Roberts had successfully convinced his followers that they were fighting a righteous war against corrupt and oppressive authorities rather than simply pursuing criminal gain. This ideological dimension of Roberts' piracy has received insufficient attention from historians who have focused primarily on his tactical innovations and personal eccentricities. But the evidence suggests that he was as much a revolutionary leader as a criminal entrepreneur, offering his followers not just material rewards, but also a coherent worldview that justified their rejection of conventional social and moral constraints. The influence of Roberts' ideas on subsequent political developments in the Atlantic world deserves serious consideration. Many of the principles embodied in his pirate code, democratic decision-making, merit-based advancement, comprehensive social insurance, protection of minority rights, would later appear in the political movements that challenged European colonial authority in North America and elsewhere. While direct connections are difficult to establish, the chronological coincidence suggests that Roberts' experiments in alternative governance may have influenced the broader revolutionary currents of the 18th century. The cultural impact of Roberts' career was even more immediate and obvious. Within months of his death, his story was being embellished and romanticized in popular accounts that emphasized his gentleman's manners and gallant behavior while minimizing the violence and criminality that had made his success possible. This process of mythologization transformed Roberts from a dangerous criminal into a romantic hero, a figure who could be safely admired without threatening the stability of legitimate society. The romantic image of Black Bart drew heavily on existing literary traditions that celebrated noble outlaws and gentleman rebels, like Robin Hood or the various Celtic heroes who had resisted foreign oppression. Roberts was portrayed as a man who used illegal means to pursue essentially moral ends. His courtesy to prisoners, his protection of women, his democratic treatment of his crowd were emphasized, while his systematic disruption of legitimate commerce and his use of violence to achieve his goals were either ignored or presented as regrettable necessities. This romanticization served important psychological and social functions in 18th century culture. Roberts became a safe outlet for fantasies of rebellion and freedom that could not be safely expressed through conventional channels. His story allowed readers to experience vicariously the thrill of rejecting social constraints and pursuing individual desires without regard for others' opinions or legal restrictions. The popularity of Roberts' story also reflected growing tensions within European and colonial society about individual rights. democratic governance, and economic justice. His pirate code's provisions for democratic decision-making and social insurance anticipated political reforms that would not be widely adopted until the 19th century, while his rejection of conventional authority figures and social hierarchies resonated with audiences who were increasingly questioning traditional sources of legitimacy. The literary treatments of Roberts's career that appeared throughout the 18th and 19th centuries revealed changing attitudes toward authority, individualism, and social justice. Early accounts emphasized his criminal nature and violent end as warnings against the dangers of rejecting legitimate authority. Later versions presented him as a romantic rebel whose crimes were justified by the corruption and oppression of the society he opposed. This evolving interpretation reflected broader changes in European and American political culture as democratic ideals and individual rights gained acceptance, while traditional forms of hierarchical authority came under increasing challenge. Roberts's story provided a historical precedent for the idea that individuals might legitimately resist unjust authority, even if the methods they chose were illegal or violent. The archaeological investigations that have attempted to locate Roberts's ships and treasure have added new dimensions to his legend, while also providing valuable insights into the material culture of early 18th century piracy. The few artifacts that have been definitively associated with Roberts's operations reveal the sophisticated technology and extensive resources that made his success possible, while also confirming many of the details recorded in contemporary accounts of his career. Perhaps more importantly, these archaeological efforts have demonstrated the continuing fascination that Roberts's story holds for modern audiences. The investment of time and resources in searching for physical evidence of his activities reflects a deep cultural need to connect with the man behind the legend, to find tangible proof that such extraordinary individual achievement was actually possible. The modern reassessment of Roberts's career by academic historians has provided a more balanced and nuanced understanding of his achievements and limitations. Recent scholarship has emphasized the economic and political contexts that made his success possible, while also acknowledging the genuine innovations in leadership and organization that set him apart from his contemporaries. This scholarly attention has revealed Roberts to be a more complex and interesting figure than either his critics or his admirers have typically recognized. His combination of intellectual sophistication and criminal ruthlessness, democratic ideals and authoritarian leadership, Christian faith and violent profession, creates a character that defies simple moral categorization while illuminating the contradictions and tensions that characterized his historical era. The lessons of Roberts's career remain relevant to contemporary discussions of leadership, organization, and social change. His ability to create loyalty and maintain discipline among diverse groups of followers, his innovative approaches to compensation and benefits, his sophisticated understanding of psychological motivation all provide insights that transcend the criminal context of his activities. Perhaps most significantly, Roberts's story reminds us that individual agency and exceptional ability can sometimes triumph over seemingly insurmountable obstacles, even if such triumphs are ultimately temporary. His 30-month career as Pirate King demonstrated that the established order, however powerful it might appear, was not invulnerable to challenge by those with sufficient courage, intelligence, and determination to resist it. The price of such resistance was ultimately death, but Roberts had accepted that bargain from the beginning. His famous motto, "A merry life and a short one," reflected his understanding that authentic existence required the willingness to risk everything for the chance to live, according to one's deepest convictions and highest aspirations. In the end, that may be Roberts' most enduring legacy, the demonstration that it is possible to live with complete authenticity and absolute freedom, even if such living can only be sustained for a brief time. The tea service grows tarnished, the silk stockings fade, but the memory of those 30 months when a Welsh sailor ruled the seas, according to his own law, continues to inspire and challenge all who hear his story.